Hi, my name's Rob Gillam. Today I'm going to be talking about the dual journey to DevOps and hybrid cloud mastery. So this is really talking about the challenges of moving to the cloud whilst simultaneously adopting a DevOps methodology. The first question we need to ask is, well, can it be done? And yes, we believe it can be done. It's not as hard as you think. The key is having the right strategy in place before you start. Going down the wrong route can be very costly and time consuming. And of course, you could just wait for another year or even another 5 years. But what's certain is the transformation of technology and business will happen with or without you. And it's also fairly certain that your competition are going to be making these changes. So let's look at the things we need to consider when moving to a dual cloud. So it brings both problems and solutions. And we've broken it down here into 8 chunks that we'll talk about as we go through this presentation. DevOps requires a culture change. It requires you to break down the silos. And this is probably the biggest challenge you're going to face. There's also the skill shortage to deal with and the challenges of hiring and upskilling your existing teams. You need to consider the complexity created by things like security and whether you're going to include DevSecOps in your transformation. One thing for certain is it's easy to think, and there's a lot of talk about API and GitOps approaches, and it's easy to think that's all you need, but we've seen this not to be the case. But it is definitely part of the solution. Then there's the problems of managing FinOps, the pitfalls of cloud waste. We hear this over and over again. As soon as you adopt cloud, then there's the challenge of how do you manage those expenses? We call that cloud mastery. You then have to decide about the type of approach you're going to take with regard to the number of clouds you're going to be using. Now, it's easy to sort of say, well, let's simplify it and have one cloud. But then you've obviously got all your eggs in one basket approach. If you go with multiple clouds, then obviously it's going to be more complex. So there's a trade-off to be made there. And finally, and perhaps the most importantly, how will this move benefit your customers? And the other side to think about is how will it give your developers a great experience? And I'll talk about that and refer to that as DevX throughout the talk. So let's jump into the first one. So culture versus operational change. Moving to a dual hybrid cloud and DevOps rollout is not a matter of just tooling and hiring. The major change is a cultural one. And if you don't realise that and act on it right at the beginning, you're going to struggle. DevOps is about agility, trust, and autonomy. And so is moving to hybrid cloud. Above all, they're a commitment to improving your organisation's developer experience, which isn't something that's going to be achieved just by implementing a ticket tool or a GitOps only approach. We know that silos can be complicated to move, and they may have been created for good reason in the past. But DevX means autonomous, non-silo based movement. Empowerment, user experience, and self-service are the key. These fundamental changes come with business culture, not a tool, although a tool will greatly help the process. And changing a culture is something that enterprises find remarkably difficult. And it's difficult because when you take into consideration that cultural change involves moulding some very long-term and deeply ingrained beliefs into something modern, dynamic, and far from the tribalism that many enterprises will still embrace. We believe the best hope is a gradual change. It's to build incrementally. Start by attracting like-minded employees and then add new employees, and then gradually what you create will become the norm throughout your organisation. The second thing to consider is the skill shortage. Many companies have come to the conclusion that all they need to do is just hire as many DevOps as they need. Just hire the right people and the problem is solved. However, they soon discover this is much, much harder than they thought. Great DevOps profiles are few and far between, and they are very, very expensive. Add to the fact that you're not the only one looking for them, and you can see that this is actually a very complex challenge. Some of the numbers are quite boggling when you see over 250,000 vacancies in LinkedIn. Clearly, the competition for these people is pretty fierce. And becoming a DevOps engineer is more than just gaining a couple of certificates. It's typically a 3-year journey, at least. Learning how to develop automation, often a lot of it open source, and managing on-prem, managing public cloud infrastructure. And more than that, it's about learning the DevOps, it's about learning the philosophy, about how to share your knowledge and help others, which means that great DevOps engineers also need soft skills. And that's sometimes the kind of thing that's much harder to acquire. There is an alternative approach. Your existing DevOps could be upskilled in both DevOps practice and in the cloud infrastructure knowledge they need. The silos of the old, where the devs did the developing and the ops did the operating and the DevOps did the DevOpsing, is fast becoming an ancient relic of less enlightened times. The whole process is now shifting left, which is great for your product, but hard on your developers, unless they have the right tooling and automation to lighten the burden. Ultimately, the smooth interaction of your existing teams, upskilled to various degrees, is instrumental to the success of getting into the fast lane. Tooling that helps more cross-role behaviours, more self-service and automation on the journey to upskilling will give ordinary devs and DevOps-like abilities that you might never have imagined they could have, hence helping them lighten the load. So things are moving fast. Never did an ecosystem change so fast. As soon as you've made a decision in the world of tech, by the time you've told your team, it's probably on the way out. Add to this the complications of an enterprise and the speed of the equation, and by the time anyone's taken a decision, the whole tech stack that you're talking about is obsolete. So a word of warning, if your devs are the ones constantly looking for new tools, you may have big problems. And if it's management that's dictating what to use, then you've probably got bigger problems, and you're definitely going to have morale, motivation, and DevX problems. Either way, managing the push and the pull of new tools is challenging, and you need to prepare early in your journey. Decide who's in charge of the tech in your organisation. It doesn't matter if the DevOps engineers themselves, the CTO, the Centre of Excellence, or the newly hired head of platform engineering are the people in charge. You need to have the headspace for innovation and clarity. And if they can carve out that and devote enough time solely to thinking about it, then you're going to achieve the headspace that you need. And automation will go some way to help. They say 50% of DevOps tasks are repetitive tasks that can be relatively easily automated. And the rest can be bridged by helping devs to be a little more autonomous in their dealings with the cloud. Now, depending on your choice of tool, you'll be able to create many shortcuts, resulting in less hassle and more peace of mind. And hopefully this will create a workplace that helps the teams foster innovation. Whatever your choice, you need to ensure that your tools work in harmony. And in harmony with other tools and your culture. Remember, you're looking to federate and consolidate complex systems rather than replace them with some magic tool. And there'll be sticky moments on this journey where your organisation decides to make a brave move into hybrid cloud and DevOps. New tools and technologies will undoubtedly be seen as more complex. And it's at that point you need to enable your tech teams to use the tools and technology they already have and become comfortable using and what they already have as their underlying automation and scripts, and not reinventing everything. And it's not every DevOps tool that will allow you to do that. So you need to choose wisely. I mentioned this at the start, the complexity of adding more functions into your DevOps, and DevSecOps is one that gets added quite a lot. So moving to hybrid cloud does imply that more care needs to be taken with security and privacy. DevOps certainly gives you a great basis to implement a specific DevSecOps initiatives in your organization. But how exactly should you go about this to ensure that your new hybrid cloud model meets everyone's security needs and expectations? It's not insurmountable, but get it wrong and you could end up with some very serious problems on your hands. We've all heard about the costs of security breaches. So it's no longer enough for the security team to rein in from high. With control moving from your server room into the cloud, your security policies would also need to change. Competent devs will make the right decision for sure, but they need the bottom-up tooling that takes their decisions from theory into reality and also puts guardrails in place for those who aren't as aware. Moving to the cloud requires your team to take a long look at what security in the age of cloud looks like. Containers, microservices, what does that really mean? Just as DevOps are revolutionizing the way your team approaches their work, the DevSecOps will revolutionize the way they look at security. And security appears at various stages throughout the infrastructure. When you create the infrastructure in your cloud, when you integrate your vault to make sure that your keys and passwords are secure, and even when you launch a pipeline that triggers some dedicated security software. This isn't by any means an exhaustive list by any means, but it should illustrate that it really is important to take a methodological step-by-step look at security in your hybrid cloud organization. And if it's not clear where to start, we suggest a comprehensive security audit carried out either by your in-house team or hire respected professionals. Now we talk about the GitOps and the API approach. I've mentioned this a couple of times because it's tempting to think that with a GitOps and API approach, that's all you need. It's enough to handle the change to a hybrid cloud. Studies have shown that developers generally use just 5% of their GitOps repository, or an average of just 5 repositories. Asking a person to find the correct repository for every service just isn't feasible. When you bear in mind that a DevOps engineer generally copies and pastes their last repository to create a new project. So even with a well-organized DevOps engineering team, there's a struggle to find the central truth. You need well-maintained, reusable repositories. And this makes GitOps a reality that's far more complex than it first might have seemed, and definitely not a streamlined process if you've got thousands and thousands of repositories out there and your DevOps are struggling to find the ones they need or figure out which ones have the automation they can reuse. So to add to that, the fact that there's also the tools, and Gartner are saying that there's an average of 28 infrastructures being used at any given company. So that's too many concepts to be handled and understood by one person. Even if a bona fide DevOps engineer can be an expert in all the cloud providers, OpenStack, VMware, etc., they're never going to be an expert in all the tools as well. It's not fair or realistic to believe that 1 or 2 DevOps engineers can be the saviour of your whole hybrid cloud approach. There are just far too many tools, best practices, opinions between whether you use Ansible, Terraform, Kubernetes, what CI/CD you use, Concourse, just to name a few. To be managed by a handful of devs, no matter how talented they are, it's just not realistically. That's why the true way to hybrid cloud mastery lies in the ability to get your whole tech team pulling in the same direction, collaborating, upskilling, and leveraging their strengths to support the parts that make the whole. Now, it might sound like a bit of a pipe dream, but there are companies out there doing it, and you can do it too. Of critical importance in your task is to select the right framework for the underlying approach. Rather than a build your own GitOps approach, we prefer a platform approach, or a tool that supports everything being carried out by your tech team. Where there's a strong foundation, building up is much easier. And that's true for a modern tech company as it is for building a skyscraper. So let's talk about the pitfalls of cloud waste. This is something that we hear all the time. Moving to the cloud brings a lot of benefits, but there are also quite a few challenges in how you manage this move and how you manage the financial aspects of running your business on a cloud. There's no way that anyone can think that hybrid cloud isn't a great idea, but there's also comes with it this cloud waste. And without the right controls, you'll have spent your whole cloud budget and then some before you've seen any return on your investment. The opportunity for cloud waste appears in many different stages of your project, which is why it's so important that it's always under control. First, your teams need to estimate the cost before deployment, which cloud providers they should use and how much they should spend. And more generally speaking, what criteria should govern their choices. To add further complications, sooner or later you'll have to consider sustainability factors when making your choices. Then, once a project is deployed, you'll have the challenge of setting up, maintaining, and managing all the tags from the cloud providers. Doing this is essential for the management of cloud base. But when you have a huge project, it isn't always a given that everybody's going to set up, and setting up tags can be a massive task and a messy task. But good tags will help you make good decisions. The more options you have for categorizing the data, the more insight you have, the better you'll be able to control your cloud spend. So once you've made the move to a dual hybrid cloud approach, you're in the ideal place to establish a robust FinOps policy. To make sure you're not making your systems extra complicated, make an effort to do this in the most streamlined way possible. By taking advice of the FinOps Foundation, for example, it's easy to see how the principles of FinOps themselves are very simple and straightforward. If you can manage to reflect this in your tooling and your governance, you'll be doing really well. So to finish, you want to be able to virtualize and study your multi-cloud costs in a central place. To reverse engineer your invoices, your cloud provider's invoices, back to your monthly costs. The right tool will support you in doing this and should provide additional tools to help you make decisions about where you run and how you optimize once you've already started to deploy. So the one cloud strategy. This is something, a few years ago we used to hear this a lot. Organizations taking a single provider strategy. And cloud providers were pushing us to migrate into a one cloud strategy, which was completely normal at the time. We hear it less for enterprises since it's easier to see the problems, but it's still a fairly common attitude. But it is an approach that just doesn't work, especially in the world of enterprise. Segregation of responsibility is an excellent example of why. There are so many responsibilities to keep a modern business afloat. The putting all your resources into one cloud or eggs into one basket is a really risky proposal. At Cycloid, we prefer to think about a hybrid cloud strategy. Sure that does complicate things a little, but not so much and it's worth it. Basically, it's worth putting the effort in. When you define where you want to host everything for each application, it's much easier to gain clarity. Of course, this clarity needs to be very deliberate. If it's not, your automation will become complicated to maintain and update, and it'll be easy to lose sight of your targets for improving DevOps. And one final warning: highly complex, ambiguous infrastructures cost a fortune to maintain, and no one likes spending money they don't have. So the one cloud automation mistakes. All cloud providers have their own ecosystem, whether they're a public or a private cloud. And these ecosystems make it possible for everything to be integrated, which is an attractive idea on the surface. But what's not obvious is even though they're integrated, they're not always aligned. It's in the cloud provider's interest to provide the best user experience, and that usually leads to a certain degree of lock-in. As you can, generally, you can't use their tools for managing somebody else's cloud or other parts of your infrastructure. However, we're seeing that cloud providers are starting to provide in-house solutions to simplify the management of on-prem assets as well as the cloud. The ultimate goal, of course, is to migrate these workloads to their cloud. It's even the main strategy for some of them, like GCP with Anthos, but they only handle part of your applications, and typically the ones that are already wrapped up in clusters and using Kubernetes, for instance. So 90% of your infrastructure and your applications is not being managed that way. So simply can't be moved that easily. So here at Cycloid, we think companies need to stay independent, both for their own sovereignty and for better DevOps. It's easy to fall into the trap of using the automation from each of the cloud providers, but that then locks you into their solutions where you need serious expertise for each cloud in a wide variety of technologies. Now, if you were to adopt the one cloud, one automation, it would mean you would never be able to migrate out of that cloud and never be able to reuse that automation on someone else's cloud. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not talking about all services and all managed providers. It makes total sense to use the cloud tools when they're the right tool. We're talking about the automation of things like configuration management, infrastructure as code, CI/CD pipelines, and your DevOps and hybrid platform, regardless of whether you're building or buying one. The important thing is that you're using the automation technology that's available to you to maintain your autonomy and favour a cross-subject expertise and the ability for your team to be mobile across the different clouds. This freedom and flexibility are what will allow you to save time and money and also roll out a better DevOps. So just to wrap up, what else will help change? Find a concrete use case to leverage your DevOps and hybrid cloud simultaneously. Consider building your first hybrid and multi-cloud CI/CD pipeline to keep your business logic on-premise whilst harnessing the power of the cloud. This will allow you to provide the first layer of multi-cloud strategy. You could use the tools and services offered by public cloud providers or adopt a transverse approach, agnostic from any given cloud provider, by using a platform like Cycloid to manage your products. Explore certain use cases. One of the principles of DevOps approach is the continuous and rapid delivery. Virtualization of containers will help this in your quest, but you need to fully understand and both decide which kind of infrastructure you want and on which various applications. Certainly, we recommend you use greater automation, and infrastructure as code is a great way to go about this. you can increase your efficiency. You can be agnostic once you start implementing infrastructure as code, and you can do this also whilst moving to a DevOps and hybrid cloud methodology. It makes new sense to usher in new automation in this era. It's not that any of these topics can't be used alone, but it makes sense, and it especially makes sense to use them all together. Infrastructure as code, configuration, CI/CD pipelines, they're all complementary, and they'll save you a lot of time, and they'll be very popular with your teams. So lastly, just ensure you have a cloud agnostic approach. Tools are going to make or break your rollout, your dual cloud, multi-cloud rollout. Let's get this straight. We're a commercial organisation, and Cycloid would of course love you to use our platform. But the message we bring is that tools and platforms you use to roll out your DevOps hybrid cloud are absolutely critical. And the same is whether you choose to build this or you choose to do it yourself. I hope this was useful. Please come and look at our website, cycloid.io, or contact me through the sales channel. We're happy to give you a demo, we're happy to explain, and we're happy just to talk more generally about this topic. So I hope this is useful. Take care. Thank you for listening.